Okay, so many things happen during the time period that's covered in this class that there are some areas that I just sort of very quickly go through to sort of tie things together. And this is one of those time periods. So this is a period in art history that is sometimes called late antiquity. And it's sort of like the connective tissue, if you will, between the Roman Empire and the Byzantine, particularly in relation to what's happening in the West, in the western part of what was the Roman Empire. Okay, so late antiquity, we're just going to go through this kind of quickly, and then the next lecture will be about the early Byzantine. All right. Important things to get to know before we get into the Byzantine proper. Here are a lot of factors that are important in the worlds of art and art history in this time period, in architectural history in this time period. First of all, we know what a basilica is from our unit on Rome. Remember, basilica was the big administrative building that was usually just off the Forum in Rome. So it had a nave, which is the central kind of open area. It had aisles on either side of the nave. It had an apse, which is this curved space at the back. The basilica plan for secular administrative buildings in the Roman Empire becomes a popular plan and kind of eventually becomes the standard plan for Christian churches. Okay, so there's a new religion called Christianity, and they're trying to figure out what their religious venues, their churches, are going to look like. So this administrative building of the basilica becomes something that is sort of a pattern for and a plan for new churches. There's also another kind of layout for churches, which is the central plan, which kind of makes sense. We'll look at examples of both. So the basilica plan, even though it's based on the basilica, which were the administrative buildings, also kind of looks like a temple, like a rectangular temple plan a little bit for the previous religion in Rome. A central plan church, which is round and has kind of the nave area in the center, and then there's an ambulatory or an aisle that goes all the way around. There's a narthex, which is the entry point, which they also have on the basilica. There's the apse, which is just kind of goes all the way around. There's radiating chapels on it. And it's kind of similar to another plan that we've looked at before, which is that of the tholos. So remember, the tholos in Rome is the round temple plan, mostly for temples to the goddess Vesta. So the basilica floor plan and the central floor plan at the pre-Byzantine in the Antiquity are the two kinds of floor plans for churches for this new Christian religion. Ravenna is the capital in the west of what's left of the Roman Empire. So we'll look at some things specific to Ravenna. Mosaics. We've seen mosaics dating back to, we saw mosaics in the Greek, in ancient Greece. We also saw mosaics in Rome, particularly those preserved at Herculaneum and Pompeii that we looked at. So mosaics we're going to see become very important in the Byzantine in terms of the two-dimensional art that is represented. Along with this new religion of Christianity, there's a whole debate related to art, not just the architecture of what the churches are going to look like, but also the way Christ will be represented visually is a big debate. And so we see lots of different kinds of visual interpretations of Christ. Then we have illuminated manuscripts. So illustrated books become a big part of artistic work at this time as well. Okay, so basilica plan. Let's look at what this looks like. Constantine is the patron of the first legal church, because remember, Constantine becomes the emperor. He attributes that victory to Christianity in a lot of ways, and he, as kind of a thank you to Christianity, basically, because he attributes that with his victory, he makes Christianity legal by signing the Edict of Milan. So Christianity is now a legal religion among the Roman Empire. So he's also the patron of the first church, which is St. Peter's. Now this is called Old St. Peter's, and it's an illustration, not a photograph, because the current St. Peter's was built basically on top of it. So in Vatican City in Rome, which is the head of the Catholic Church today, where the Pope is, St. Peter's Basilica, St. Peter's Church that is there, the version of it that is there is built on top of this, and it was designed by Michelangelo, so much, much later in the Renaissance. The original Old St. Peter's is in the basilica form that we see here, and is built in Rome, Italy in 320. So let's take a look at it. So you can see from the plan, the basilica is based on the administrative buildings that were called basilicas that exist in the Roman Empire. So we have a nave, which is the central space that is similar to, in a temple, you had the naos, or the cella, as you might recall, that was the middle part, and then you have the aisles on either side, and then at the end you have this rounded area called the apse. And in a secular basilica, that was kind of where the government official would sit to hear petitions by the people, that kind of thing. In the church, that's where the altar is, okay? Also, on Old St. Peter's, we have some other features. So the narthex is kind of like the porch of a temple. It's the place where you come in. And Old St. Peter's also had this big atrium, which is kind of like a courtyard with a colonnade around it, which is a little bit similar to ideas about like a Roman forum, ideas about the atrium of domus, of Roman houses. So it's all kind of makes sense. It's in keeping with these designs that we have seen before. We also have a clerestory. So this is the fenestrated, the part with windows to let light in. And originally we have a gable roof that has timber, so is burnable, which is kind of an issue that we'll see as we move through the Middle Ages into later church design. Okay, the other plan for churches is the central plan. So here's an example of that. It's Santa Costanza, which is in Rome. And so it is similar when we think about the tholos, the round temples, particularly in the Roman Empire. The tholos were devoted to Vesta, the goddess Vesta. So very similar kind of design, except instead of being open around the sides with columns all the way around, they're walled off and closed off, but still a circular plan. We have the altar in the middle of the space, and then the ambulatory is like an aisle that goes around the altar. There's still a clerestory where all the windows are so that you can get light into your area, into your main, into the church, basically. And then there's also a narthex, which is again like kind of the entryway. Okay, another big thing in late antiquity leading into the Byzantine is mosaic and the mosaic process. So when we looked at pelamosaics in Greece, that were popular in the court of Alexander the Great, those were made out of individual little stones. Then when we see in Roman households that are well preserved in Herculaneum and Pompeii, we see mosaic made out of tile, which is a whole bunch of little tiles. The individual tiles are called tessera, right? And those are painstakingly made, then glazed, and then arranged to create images. And this is very popular during the Byzantine era, so it's a technique that we want to be aware of, its continuation. Depictions of Christ. With any new religion, the iconography, or the way visual images representing ideas, concepts, and people from the new religion are important to develop. And so along with the architectural piece of figuring out what the churches are going to look like and these two different kinds of plans and kind of trying these out, depictions of Christ are also something that is heavily debated at this time. There's a lot of feelings from the religious community and also the political community about how this new God should be portrayed. And so this is a really interesting example. So we have the chi rho, right? The kind of the chi, which is the Greek letter that looks like an X, and the rho, which kind of looks like a P, which are the first two letters of Christ in Greek. So that's kind of a secret symbol to represent Christ. Also, we have the ichthus, the fish, becomes a symbol of Christ at this time. And so this is one of the very earliest depictions of Christ in a human form, okay? So not like as a Christogram, as a symbol. And what's interesting here is because this religion is new, and it's at first was not a legal religion, there were sort of secret ways of portraying Christ other than the Christogram. So this is Christ as Sol Invictus. Sol, as we know, is the Roman god of the sun. In Greek, it's Helios. And so this is a depiction of Christ that could be mistaken for a depiction of Sol, the sun god, and it's intentionally supposed to be vague like that, so that the people who created it couldn't get in trouble. Because if someone said, hey, it's illegal to be a Christian, you can't have this imagery of your new god, they could be like, oh, no, this isn't Christ, this is Sol, the sun god. See the rays of light coming from his head? It's clearly the sun god. There are the horses for his chariot, which he drives the sun across the sky in. So it's this kind of sneaky image, which is interesting. So these things that could be considered sun rays coming from his head, that's where we get the halo. So the halo that designates holy figures in the Christian religion comes from this early representation of Christ as the sun god. And more specifically, the way that his halo is depicted has this cruciform within it. So it's a cruciform halo, meaning it shows the arms of the cross in the halo to identify Christ specifically. Because the Virgin Mary has a halo, saints have halos, angels have halos, so there's different Christian figures that are shown with this halo later. But Christ is the only one who has the cruciform halo, and it kind of comes from these early depictions where he's depicted as the sun god. This is in an old mausoleum underneath St. Peter's. And, oh, the other thing, it's kind of hard to see. So he has his hand out in this image, and there's a round orb in his hand. And so that is symbolizing that he is the ruler of the universe. So he's the God not just for the small community, but he is the God for everyone in the universe. So that's what the symbolism there is. Okay. This unassuming little building, which is in Ravenna, which remember becomes the capital of the Roman Empire in the West, is the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia. When you go inside, it's really beautiful. I love Ravenna. It's one of my personal favorite cities in Europe, actually. When you go inside, it's extremely beautiful. The whole thing, it's not a very big building, but it's entirely covered in mosaic. The windows are very, very thinly sliced agate, so kind of before there was stained glass, there were these really thin agate windows, which were very beautiful and create this really specific kind of light. You can see the groin vaults and all the arches, and everything is totally covered in careful mosaic. So, much debate about how Christ should be depicted at this time. And one of the ways that he is depicted that becomes part of his iconography, which again, there's that word, that's part of his visual representation in artworks, is as the good shepherd. So it's this idea that he's a shepherd, he's like a herder, a shepherd leading the way for people, right? For the people that he's seeking out to be his followers and his congregation. Now, I don't know who made this mosaic, but I don't think they had ever seen a sheep before. So these are meant to be sheep. I think they're really funny looking. They kind of look like, I don't know, cat dragons with hooves? I don't know. They're a very strange version of sheep, but these are supposed to be sheep. Okay, so picture in your head that these are sheep. So that would communicate Christ in this personification of him in which he's the good shepherd. Okay, so that becomes one of his kind of identifiers. Oh, how else can we tell this is Christ? Well, he has a halo, so halos become the designator in the Christian visual imagery of people who are holy and significant. He's holding a staff that is cruciform, that's in the form of a cross, which is a little bit confusing because this is supposed to depict him pre-crucifixion, so it's kind of weird that he's holding a cross, but that becomes kind of one of his attributes, is this identification with the cross. And so we see him in this setting, in this role as the Good Shepherd. One of the things I always ask my seated classes is, what do you notice that's strange about him? And one of the things that people tend to pick up on is he doesn't have a beard. And we're kind of used to this depiction of Christ as having a beard. Well, this was actually pretty significant. At this time, there was much debate, and there were all these councils where they were trying to decide about the humanity versus the divinity of Christ and what's going to be like the way that he ends up being portrayed. And one group of people kind of thinks that the humanity of Christ is important. It's important to show that he ages. So he's a baby, then he's a young man with no beard, and then he's crucified when he's 33. So to show he's older, he has a beard then. So in Ravenna, this idea of Christ's humanity and as him being someone who ages is the kind of popular position. So we see a lot of depictions of him with a beard and then without a beard within the same kind of visual space. Also, in this mausoleum, we have a chi rho or Christogram. So there is the letter chi with the letter rho kind of bisecting it, which is the first two letters of Christ. So that's kind of the secret symbol that then becomes a well-known symbol once Christianity is legal. In this particular iteration of it, we have an alpha and an omega on either side, which in the Greek alphabet, alpha starts the alphabet and omega is the last letter in the alphabet. So the idea is Christ is the beginning and the end, or Christ being like eternal, essentially, is the idea here. Okay, so in this one little building, we have multiple representations of Christ. This is Constantine. Remember from our late empire discussion in the Roman Empire, I showed you that image of Constantine, that statue, where we start seeing less of an interest in naturalism and representing people how they actually look and an interest in realism. So he is depicted as having these really big eyes in that sculpture, and here on the coins that were used during his reign, we also see he has those really big eyes. And maybe he was a guy that just had really big eyes, like an anime character, we don't know. But this is Constantine. And then on the back of the coin, what do we have? We have a Christogram. We have the chi and a rho. Why did he do that? Well, as we know from our earlier lectures, putting your face on the money is a way to remind everyone who uses the money in your whole empire that you are why they have wealth and stability. And so at the same time, he wanted to also attribute that to Christianity. He wanted to spread this religion of Christianity in the empire. So he put the symbol of Christianity on the money, which is kind of strange when you really think about it, because Christ wasn't super into money. But anyway, according to the book and whatnot. Anyway, money. Constantine on one side, Christogram on the other. Okay, another church in Ravenna that plays a role in this discussion and kind of visual discussion about what Christ is going to look like is San Apollinare Nuovo. So we have a basilica-style church. We've got our nave, we've got our aisles, we've got the apse at the back where the altar is. We have a nice colonnade with Roman arches all the way down. We have a clerestory with Roman arches over the windows all the way down. And then we have all these mosaics. So on the bottom, we have all of these female martyrs, women who were killed for being Christians. In the clerestory, we have prophets. And then in the top part of the mosaics, we have scenes from the life of Christ. Here we have Christ as a baby sitting on Mary's lap. So you can tell it's Christ because he has the cruciform halo, right? The halo with the cross in it. Mary's halo does not have a cross in it. Then we have young Jesus with the fish and the fishes and the loaves of bread that he performs a miracle and makes more bread and fish out of it. You'll notice he has no beard, but he does have his cruciform halo. Then we have young Jesus as the good shepherd standing here with sheep that look a little more like sheep. Still no beard, still cruciform halo. Also, he's wearing purple. Purple is a color that is associated with royalty. So the whole idea of Christ being the King of Kings, he's depicted as purple to kind of signify him as the important figure. So is his mother's also wearing purple. And then we see in the same church, in the same series of depictions of him, we see Christ with long hair and a beard. So this is when he's older. So these mosaics show him aging because in Ravenna, the humanity of Christ and that depiction of that humanity is considered kind of a big part of his story. Okay, so in contrast to our sun god depiction where he is supposed to look eternal and divine like Sol, the sun god, we here have him aging in the mosaics. Okay, the last thing that I just want to introduce is the concept of illuminated manuscripts. So in Christianity, the text is an important part of the religion. So we have the Gospels and the different books from the Bible. So reproductions of those have to be made by hand at this time, obviously. A lot of the population is illiterate. So one of the things that starts happening is we start having illustrations in these copies of books. So here, illuminated usually means lit up, right? But in this case, it means illustrated. So illuminated manuscripts are illustrated books. And this is where we see a lot of artistic development and visual development in terms of how Christ and the figures of Christianity are portrayed visually. So there's Christ in the bottom part of this illustration. You can see he has a beard, he has the cruciform halo. So we see some of the same kind of depictions. You'll also notice that everything is kind of flattening out and is becoming less realistic and less of a focus in the naturalism that we see in the Roman Empire. Okay, next time we will talk about the Byzantine.